So Kamala Harris was asked recently about what her plan is regarding Gaza, and she just repeated the same old tired lines in a typically kind of vacuous fashion that is no vision for how things should change moving forward, no recognition that the status quo cannot remain the same. And Bill Maher picked up on this in a recent monologue and discussion. I want you to watch his words when he reflected on the words of the Democratic nominee Harris.
Long-awaited second front in the Israeli war seems to have started this week. Not just the pagers, but they're bombing all over the Lebanon yesterday and today. Here's what Kamala Harris said this week about what we should do when the war is over. No reoccupation of Gaza, no changing of the territorial lines of Gaza, and an ability to have security in the region for all concerned in a way that we create stability. I feel like if that's what you have to say, don't say anything. Just shut up. I mean, everybody who talks about Israel these days is just so full of shit. I mean, or just not, I don't want children to die. Duh, who does? None of us want children to die. None of us want this war to go on. But it's not addressing what the problem is. The problem is that one side wants a two-state solution, or at least always did. It's a little more right-wing now. I'm talking about Israel, but that's still been their position. One side never did and still doesn't. One side uses terrorism to get their goals. One side retaliates against terrorism. One side is accused of genocide but doesn't do it. The other side actually would love to do it. People keep saying Israel has the right to defend itself. And then whenever Israel does, they object to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is one of the astonishing things about the response to the pager bombings. I understand how people are upset about the site of Gaza being bombed. They're being bombed because Hamas hides beneath and behind its own population to cynically exploit their deaths. But then the Israelis turn around with the most astonishingly well-targeted attack in history, like literally going off in the hands of any Hezbollah member who has one of these pagers, and you have people like Congresswoman AOC lambasting Israel, the head of the UN lambasting Israel. So they say Israel's entitled to self-defense, but there's no conceivable self-defense that they're actually prepared to defend for the Israelis. I'm glad the Israelis are taking things in their matters in their own hand. They just took care of a terrorist who had the death of 350 or 300 Americans on their hands going back to 1983. He had a $7 million State Department bounty on his head. If I were Anthony Blinken, I would pay the Israelis $7 million and say thank you for avenging the death of our Marines.
To Kamala Harris's response, she is in a tricky position because Joe Biden is currently the commander-in-chief and she's the VP. So it's very difficult for anybody in her position to kind of thread this needle and say, here's what we should do, here's our plan, when he's the current commander-in-chief. She's in this weird space of like an improv show of like a yes and, yes to what he's doing, and I think we should do this. So it's especially tricky.
But my question to you, I mean, it's an honest question, is she just being vague because the political equities are such that it doesn't pay to be specific? Or does she simply have no idea? And, I am an undecided...
Okay, then that's not an honest question to me, because there's no way you think I'm going to turn and say, you know what, Brett, you're right. She has no idea.
No, it's...
Well, it's funny because I think in some ways that could be a fair discussion to have. Why not? By the way, Harris wouldn't be alone in not being sure what to do. Many people aren't sure. The problem, though, that I have and that Bill has is repeating the same old tired lines, and she did that in the debate, and many people do, by the way. It's not just Harris that talk about, we've got to make sure that Israel doesn't reoccupy Gaza. We've got to make sure that Israel doesn't maintain its presence there in Gaza. I think that's something they don't want. Not quite clear, but it doesn't look like that's what they want. In some ways, they just want to continue things as they have been for the last 2 decades. And then she spoke about, Israel needs security, but we've got to have Palestinian self-determination. The problem with all of this is repeating the same old tired lines is that it has become crystal clear now in the aftermath of October 7th. I think in some ways this was the final straw for many Israelis which is why they talk about Israel becoming more right-wing. Well, it's not really right-wing, it's just reacting to the reality, which is that they've spent nearly a century, beginning in the 1930s, to work towards a two-state solution. And they've always said yes. And the Jews have frankly always had a stronger claim to the land as an individual, unique nation that once settled there as their own sovereign state 2,000 years ago, that's always maintained a presence there, always desired to return to that land. The Arabs came many centuries later and only settled in some pockets of the territory, but they certainly did settle. They never considered themselves indigenous native to that land. They saw themselves as part of the wider Arab nation, of which they have dozens of other states. They don't see themselves as a unique Palestinian nation. And Israel's come to the realization that it was clearly just this whole idea of a Palestinian people was just a cynical ploy to try and get rid of Israel. They tried for decades prior to the 60s to wipe out Israel through the other Arab nations conquering it, and then they'd all take hold of different portions of the land. And then they tried after that to create this notion of a Palestinian state and nation-state identity, and they thought that could be the way that they could get the world on board to try and destroy Israel. But we've seen from October 7th that Israel's now tried, having given so many peace deals offers, and then trying a mini two-state solution with Gaza in 2005 to see let's see how it would work. Israel unilaterally disengages in 2005, gives over the land, territory, greenhouses, buildings, beautiful beachfront of Gaza, and within literally days, Hamas are elected, take over, and fire rockets into Israel, create a terror state inside of Gaza. And of course, we saw just recently what this climaxed in with October 7th, just under a year ago. And so to then say, well, because of all that, we now need to talk about Palestinian statehood. They've shown us that the only reason they're interested in negotiating or having any kind of strategy of taking some elements of land is simply as a means to an end of destroying Israel. So when that's the precedent we have for nearly 100 years of the Palestinians just wanting to wipe out Israel, even when they've had generous offers, we'd had Arafat walk away, and Bill Clinton said it was entirely Arafat's fault in 2000 at the Camp David peace accords, and they responded instead with intifadas and terrorism. And when we see even recently consistent reporting of polling done by Palestinian polling companies saying that the vast majority of Arabs in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank as it's termed, supporting what happened on October 7th, the genocide that took place on October 7th, how on earth can any fair-minded person say Israel should then look towards doing a two-state solution? If Israel was to disengage from Judea and Samaria, by the way, clues in the name, Judea, this is Jewish territory. But if Israel was to disengage, what would happen? October 7th would, God forbid, pale in comparison. So how could anyone possibly be talking about that? The only thing, if you still wanted to peddle the narrative of wanting a two-state solution, the only thing you should be talking about at this stage is ensuring Israel's security, that she deals with the terrorism, and that you de-radicalize the populations. That's what you should be talking about right now. Talking about a two-state solution right now? I'm sorry. But this indulges in the myth that the Palestinian cause is based on some kind of legitimate grievance, and that the terrorism is somehow justified, or maybe not justified, but resistance to that grievance. And unfortunately, people like Harris are peddling this false narrative, which is so dangerous, because it calls for more concessions on Israel's side, which just leads to more bloodshed. It's not about a legitimate grievance. The Palestinian cause has been about a hateful jihadist ideology that wants to wipe out the Jewish state. That's what it's always been about. If it was about statehood, they'd have a state many, many decades ago. And I've said this in countless videos. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I would say at the very least, people should be taught, if you're going to wade into the whole Gaza issue, first of all, you should be insisting that Israel had maintained a presence there, security presence, because clearly disengagement did not work. And secondly, okay, talk about de-radicalization, that's at the very least. But I would say further, we have seen from what happened in Gaza, from now nearly a century of Israel's history, that two-state solution model doesn't work and that Israel needs to rethink. This is the conclusion of the former American ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, who's just come out with a new book, One Jewish State, where he says Israel has to apply Jewish sovereignty over all the territories. How they figure out what they're going to do with the populations there, he proposes various solutions. And other people have other solutions. And let's be clear, as a Jewish state, we want everyone to live in peace. We want to live side by side with non-Jews. We don't want to have any of these difficult decisions. But if you're going to have a hateful ideology bent on our destruction that doesn't actually have a genuine national claim, you're simply just creating false flags and identities as a way to annihilate the Jewish state, then we're going to have to get tough. But also the truth is, as I was saying before, Judea, Samaria, Gaza, this is Jewish territory. This is Jewish land. And the Jewish people have every right to be there. And actually, the more we indulge this idea of two-state solution, we're actually feeding our own suffering, because we're telling them, maybe you've got a point, maybe we are guilty, maybe you really belong here and we don't. Maybe you really have the right to this land. They're saying, no, it's all ours. And the world's thinking, well, if you're not going to give up, you think it's all yours, maybe you're right. The person that's compromising say, yeah, let's just split it. Maybe they don't have such a strong claim because they're prepared to split it. Would you split your own house if someone took it from you? So maybe the world will be much more convinced of our story and our side if we started to say, actually, from the river to the sea, the land is Jewish.
Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.